Check. 1, 2, 3.
The D.
Brief.
This is the D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit.
Your guide to Detroit's
arts and entertainment scene.
This is the D
Brief.
All right, Becky, welcome to the podcast. I'm your co-host. My name is Seth Ressler.
And I'm Becky Scarcello.
And there is a museum right there on Grand River at West Grand Boulevard. It is the MBAD African Bead Museum.
And it's not a traditional museum like you would think.
No.
It's amazing and very interactive and mostly outdoors.
Yes, and just opened a new exhibition space.
Yeah, expanding. Mm-hmm.
So we have with us today the founder, Dabls, joining us on the podcast. Dabls, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely.
So for somebody who hasn't been there before, describe the MBAD African Bead Museum.
It's a museum that has an outside installation that takes up 2 city blocks. And we have a bead museum with beads dating back as much as 2,000 years. And it's user-friendly, and it's not like your typical museum. There's no narrative, there's no captions, so we have a lot of confidence in the fact that the art would appeal to your palate.
So I don't know very much about African beads. I mean, can you give me kind of the intro to African beads, and what do people need to know?
Well, African beads date back 30,000 years in most places. In certain places in Africa, they have unearthed beads that date back 75,000 years. But
wow.
Beads have been a part of all people on the planet, but they were never used for adornment. They were used to communicate specific information about the wearer, his status, rites of passage, etc. The wearing of beads for aesthetic purposes occurred within the last couple of 100 years. So it's fascinating that you can wear a pair of beads and that other people have worn those beads, and that energy is in those beads. And that's one of the first things that people talk about when they come there, that there's an energy here that everyone connects with.
I would agree. When I went there, I was really blown away walking through the outdoor exhibits and the shards of mirror and the colors. And it's like you can see yourself in this environment. Yeah. Can you describe some of your pieces out there?
Yeah, the installation is not there just by chance. In my research of traditional African history, I kept running into 3 materials: iron, rocks, wood, and mirrors. And it was said these materials had special properties, magic and medicine. So I'm like, magic and medicine? So I began to use those materials in building the installation, and to my amazement, people would come around and just feel good about themselves. Now, there's some scientific reasons for that. There's enough iron in every one of us to make a 3-inch nail. We can't live without iron. It's the most abundant material on the planet. So it's quite natural that we would respond to that. The science say that we respond to materials that other people have touched and left their energy in. Now, wood, the tree, we can't live without the tree. And our ancestors used to see the tree as stationary life form. If you Google the latest discovery of the tree, it would blow your mind. The trees feel pain. They can relocate in search of water. In certain places in South America, the trees make it rain. And in Japan and China, there are places where if you are depressed or stressed out, they send you in the forest and you come out on the other end and you're normal again. Your depression is gone, your mental stress is gone. So trees have a very personal relationship with them. Also, rocks. When the planet was forming, rocks were the materials that stopped the water, and it created this stew that, because of the volcanoes, algae began to grow. So rocks, we have a very special relationship with rocks. And you will see that in certain things that people do with rocks today. Some say that birthstones are special. They make them feel good. So we have not lost contact with these materials. It's just I'm using them in a collective way. Let's talk about the mirror, for instance. The mirror, when you look in a mirror, you're actually looking behind you. And what's behind you becomes closer. When you look in a mirror, the person that's looking at you, that's not the same person that that you see. So mirrors are amongst us, but they're not abiding by the rules of physics. For instance, when you and I look down the road, items appear much smaller. But a mirror can send images from millions of light years in space, and it's true. The images, it hadn't been distorted. So mirrors are amongst us, and our ancestors recognized that in two ways. Mirrors are either good luck or bad luck. A broke or cracked mirror can be 7 years of bad luck. But in Africa, any portion of a mirror made you a very special person because it was porters to different universities. So there's lots of things that we're using collectively that our ancestors said it communicates with us. We ran into a problem a few years back when science asked us to prove these things. Mm-hmm. And since some things you just can't prove, but science is leaning more towards what our ancestors have done in the past than what they are doing now. They are validating a lot of things that were suspect in the past, especially about this concept of magic in medicine.
How did you learn about African beads?
What sparked that you're...
It was a long evolutionary process. I started working at the first African American museum in Michigan, the second one in the country. So there was no job description. So I thought I had to know something about everything. I acted like a sip. I was young, eager to learn. So I learned things that I would never have to use, but it was all in developing me to search and ask questions about things that we take for granted. So because of that inquiring nature, I ran into African art. African art is different than any other art on the planet. It is an art that is designed to communicate with the people through what the ancestors left behind. We know those things as triggers, but the African people actually knew that we had a subconscious. So they designed things in the material culture. When you look at them, it triggers the information that's in you. So the art it cannot just be used for entertainment purposes or to make your living quarters look comfortable. It embodies information about that particular culture group. So that's how I got interested in this whole ideal of things having energy. And I decided to open a bead museum back in 1999. I had worked at a museum that was structured, and it would have been impossible for me to build a museum in the community using the rules that govern museums.
Exactly.
So I said, okay, now what are you going to do here? So with the information that I had about Africa and how they created information out of things they left laying around, I said, you know what, Dabls? Don't worry about narratives. Don't worry about captions. Just put this stuff up, and if there's any validity to it, it will communicate with people on its own. So we've been forced to think that there's only 5 ways of gathering information, but we have sensors that go off all the time that warn us of things that we don't pay any attention to. So I said, I'm going to rely on these sensors and see if people can get it. And people were able to get it. Now, I had worked at the Charles Wright Museum. There were things that I had noticed that made me go, if a black person and a white person were talking, if they talked long enough, they would reach a point that they stopped listening at each other. They would just be
Yeah.
talking. So I said, why is that? So I discovered metaphors. I created a metaphor. I said, if there's any truth to what I'm doing here, it means it should cross that barrier where people don't like to go. And the metaphor dealt with 500 years of information, a relationship between Africans and Europeans. No one had ever tried this before. That installation out there is dealing with those issues. And history is supposed to be an educational vehicle. But if you can't listen or hear the history, then you can't move forward. So the museum has served two primary purposes. That black and white people come there and look at the installations. And they both have the same experience about what's going on there. We have people coming there every day, literally from all over this world, by word of mouth. The museum has proven that everything cannot be packaged and sold through a structured institution. There are certain things that get out there and they create a life of their own. We was on the issue that we were having was funding. There were three organizations, I'm going to call the names anyway, the Kresge Foundation, the Knights Foundation, and Patronicity, under the guise of Ally Media, because we are not a nonprofit. I did not want to get bogged down with being a nonprofit. I said that there's got to be a way that someone would have the confidence to handle all our finances so we wouldn't have to deal with the money, and that person would have the confidence for these agencies that they would donate this money. So they did. Those three organizations gave us $300,000. In real estate, that's not a lot of money, especially in construction. But we were able to put roofs on 3 buildings, and one of the buildings, the floors had dropped 6 inches. So that required a lot of reconstruction, but we pulled it off. We have a museum that is stable, and people can still come there and donate and interact with beads that are 300-400 years old without any kind of barrier, security glass, because we emphasize the value of these materials, not the material costs.
Right.
And it has worked. You could literally go over there now and knock a window out and go in the building.
But don't do that.
Is there anywhere else in the world that you can do this?
No, because most places in the world, you become what you're around becomes what you think it is. We
Right.
don't think there's anything there worth stealing.
Right.
But we think there are things that people should see and feel the energy that vibrates from it.
Do you hear from people that they get the same energy from certain exhibits, or are there any of the installations where people, maybe different people from different backgrounds, get different energies from it?
Because of people traveling there from all over the world, I concluded that we are more alike than we can ever imagine. It's just the language that we use is the only barrier. People have the same kind of expressions, emotional reaction to things. It's a universal feeling. We've pretty much had people represented every country on the planet, and I kid you not, there have been people. We had a family came in from India, and the same kind of expressions is identical to the family that came from Israel, the family that came from Germany. It's universal, and people see that place as representing them, but actually it was built for African people, because I came out of the museum, so I still had this desire that African people need to be exposed to their own history, their own culture. And to my surprise, what I discovered was universal. I had no idea that people all over the planet use beads.
Right.
That was new to me. But some of the first visitors were much older people from Russia, other European countries, they would come in and it triggered things, and they would begin to talk about how their family used these beads when they were a child. Now, these people coming in, they are my age, so that meant that their family and grandparents, we back in the 1800s. But they had forgotten that they used beads because we were all gung-ho about this industrial revolution that we pretty much walked away from tradition. It is my conclusion that tradition is far more important than the future will ever be. Because in tradition, you have all the answers to all things that have happened to us as people. And it also made me realize that the issues between Africans and Europeans is just about 500 years. That's about 9 generations. But that just consumed us to the point that it's mind-boggling that we can't deal with these 500 years as though it was an incident in time. We keep bogging down in that. The city has recognized that there's something special about the place, and they allow me to operate. And they also want to find what's going on here, Dabls. Why is that you have something that appeals to the palate of all people on the planet, and we have folks who design destination points, and they can't get the people that come, like you, get coming to this place. And I don't know the answer, but I know it's dealing with iron, rocks, wood, and mirrors.
Yeah.
Because it's obvious that we're connected with those things. It just can't be denied.
When you come across a bead for the first time,
Yes.
what do you do? What are you looking for? How do you interact with it?
Well, identifying beads occurred to me back in 1988. There was a lady who wrote a book on the history of beads. The book was 4 inches thick, 11 by 17.
Whoa.
And every page had about 30 or 40 different types of beads.
Huh.
And from that, I had a source that I could identify, or at least put these beads into various categories. And all people on the planet have used beads. Beads have been used as dated materials for other artifacts. Mm-hmm. So beads history was known to the anthropologists, but not to the general public. The interest in beads started in this country in the 80s with the advent of festivals. The city of Detroit started holding festivals that represented the 7 cultures that was in this city. So that brought in international beads. They were dealing with more than beads, but it brought them here, and they began to sell these beads that they had gathered back home that had no value whatsoever. Because if you have something as powerful as beads, if you want people to stop using the beads, you're going to discredit the beads.
Right.
And that's what they had, discredit the beads. So the beads had no value to the people because they were perceived as being something negative. But when the bees came to this country, we had no experience with what was happening on the continent. So we saw the bees and began to appreciate the bees and began to wear them. And I decided I would collect them. So identifying the bees for me over a period of 30 years, I'm able to identify 90% of the bees and do a good guesstimate about bees that I don't know anything about, because all the bees have been documented. There's more documentation on bees than anything else because they were used in part of the African trade system. Most Europeans, when they visited Africa for the first time, they were there as scouts. They were gathering things they could take back to their country, manufacture, and bring them back. If you have a culture that the beads are so intertwined into their culture, if you remove the beads, you destroy the culture, then that's something you may be able to exchange or upgrade to a material that's non-biodegradable. And that's where the beads came in and became the replacement for biodegradable materials like seeds, bones, horns, etc.
Now, how did you move from the beads to these larger installations outdoors? Was it kind of try to describe the culture and context?
When I opened the Bead Museum on Grand River at West Grand Boulevard, that place was bleak.
Yes.
But something said, do it anyway. So I remember this word that said curb appeal. So I said, I need some curb appeal to
so
stop
some
people
flash.
where they would come in.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to just put any kind of designs on the building, because in my research, it became quite obvious to me that art is communicating with people. It's not just something for adornment to attract people. So I needed to decorate the buildings. So I use beads. I start drawing and painting beads on the building. Now, if you are a studio painter, the first thing you have to realize is that when you start painting outside, you got to have a faster technique, and it still has to maintain some kind of integrity as far as people would like it and appreciate it. So I began to make these large beads, big patterns, and just put paint on them. When I discovered the sun make any colors complementary, it's not like in a studio. And I was on, but one day I was out there on the field. I picked up a rock. This rock had a piece of iron protruding out of it. I looked at it and I said, oh, iron teaching rocks how to rust. I said, okay, you got a book here, because the title is nice. So I said, okay, what am I going to do here? I have all this space, all this debris, all this trash. What can I use here in this art store to build these exhibits out of? So I selected iron, rocks, wood, and mirrors to build the installations. And that's how I got people to stop. Now, this was about the same time that the camera and iPhone, not iPhone, but phone became one. So that meant that people who were on vacation could take quality pictures when they go back home and show them. Something else popped up during that same time period. Facebook, it became public.
Yeah.
And social media also popped up then. So now we have this new thing called computer with not much substance there. And the people who travel just start flashing my images all over the world. So we were known in other countries before we were known by people 2 blocks over.
Wow.
Yeah.
And people started traveling to see the place. It had never occurred to me that people would travel just to see art. It was the furthest thing from my mind. Well, come see the art that we were producing. It just did not happen. And so we were exposed to European travelers long before people in the city realized that we were there.
Wow.
It just worked because of timing. There's no other time in the city of Detroit could I have taken 2 blocks and just built some stuff.
It's true. It's true.
And nobody, it's unique. And I can't do it now because when we got a new governor, the mayor, the first thing he did was take control of the city land and the people who were squatting or taking advantage of it. But they allowed that installation to stand because so many people felt the energy. If someone is, see, you got a city full of people with no money. People can cope better if there's a relief mechanism that they are not aware of. And that's where art comes in at. You're around it, you see it, you can cope better with being poor. See, poor is something we've had for thousands of years, but being depressed about it is new. So people see what we've done there without realizing they are getting a dose of some kind of therapy because they see it, it does its job, and they're able to cope. And that's what we have brought to that community. And people traveling here from all over the world have the same kind of issues that we have, and the same kind of expressions come out. This place just makes me happy. It inspires me.
And now you've been able to expand a bit.
Yeah.
Talk about your new space.
Yeah, well, first, I think it's important I talk about how I acquired that property.
Yeah.
In 1996, I approached a lady named Artie Riddicks to buy that property on land contract. It really pissed her off. She was angry, and so she pissed me off. So I said, why don't you just give me the property then? She had a strange look on her face, and she said, I'm out of here. You're crazy. But she called me back a couple of days later and said, if I gave you that property on a handshake, would you promise to do what you said you was going to do with it, which was to build a museum in the community where young black children could see these things that were made by them. Mm-hmm. So that's how I acquired the property. But it had been neglected. So back in maybe 4 years ago, there was an architect came to the city. He was a graduate of Cranbrook. He stopped by. I gave him a tour. He went back to L.A. Then he called me because we had received the grant from the NICE Foundation, but it was a matching grant. Mm-hmm. So he said, Dabls, I think I can help you. I said, you can? He said, yeah. I said, how? He said, well, Dabls, you're going to need permits and architectural drawings to show the city. They're not just going to let you build it because you say you can. He said, I will do that pro bono for you. So I said, what does pro bono mean?
But I think I like the sound of it.
So he said, that means that I would pay for all the work that I'm doing. So I said, why didn't you just say that?
Free.
It's
right,
free
just
to
say
you.
free.
So he said, I like you. You got a sense of humor. So he has been the architect that's been behind all the development that we have engaged in. Now, at this last open house we had to show the investors who had donated money to us that we had spent the money how we said we was going to spend it. The city said that we're going to help with this phase 2. Now, I promised when I first opened there that I would never go to the city for a dime. Mm-hmm. I said, they are going to have to come to me because if I'm put in a position, if I go to them, I lose whatever I have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But by them coming to me, that means that they are going to help. I didn't want to stand in line and ask for money. I knew that this place would work because I could tell by all the people that it's attracting from all over the world. One day I received a call from the state of Michigan. It said, congratulations, Dabls, you're one of Michigan's 10 jewels. I could name 10 things then that I thought had a higher number in that list than we did. He said, okay. I said, how do you gather these lists?
What's your data?
He said, travelers are the few people that everyone is monitoring.
Yes.
And your name of this place popped up on all these search engines.
TripAdvisor.
Yes.
That's what I saw.
Yeah.
Now, Google knew that when they were just mainly an information source. When they first started virtual reality, when they do the virtual stores, mm-hmm. They came and filmed our gallery about 8 years ago because we were getting so many inquiries about what was going on. They wanted to help us. I don't think they said they had 5 people that was using their virtual stores at that time.
So that's how the people get there.
Yeah.
I want to know how the beads get there.
Yeah.
Where are these beads coming from? And are they new beads? Are they old beads?
Are you acquiring more all the time?
Are you making them?
Well, after 9/11, the beads started coming in because if you can believe this, up until 9/11, anybody on the planet could put a bag full of anything together, bring it to America, and sell it and go back home.
True.
But after 9/11, it became a whole different place. In 1985, the city of Detroit, 1983, they start highlighting the various cultures in this city. And those cultures brought vendors in. And those vendors had all these beads. And once they came to this country, they knew where they could go sell their product. That was probably not 2 weeks past from 1983 to 1999 that a vendor didn't stop at my store and show me his product. And once, if they like you, they will leave the beads with you and tell you, pay my brother and he will get me my money, or you could send the money to me by Western Union. So that's how I was able to acquire all these beads. I didn't have to buy them. If you're in business, your greatest expense is inventory.
Right.
So folks are just dropping beads off to me, and I would sell and pay them whenever I could, and it worked.
And often you're not paying them, you're paying their relatives overseas.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I had about 8 or 9 families over there who would call me. The way traditional African dealers operated was kind of frustrating for me. They bring their bag of beads in. How's your mother? How's your father? How's your brother? And you go through that routine, and it's, well, how are you doing? How's the business? And after about 20 or 30 minutes, okay, let's do business.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
That's a lot of small talk.
Right.
Yeah, but it built up relationship,
Sure.
and since I had a personal interest in what they had, I began to educate them about some of the things that they had. That builds friendship, trust, and loyalty. When you care enough about someone, you know their particular product. See, Africa is very segregated. Each trader that came, I saw, he only represented stuff from his particular culture. So that meant I knew something about his beads. That just made him special to me.
So give me an example of a cultural difference.
The type of beads they have, how they use those beads in a particular culture. Everything depended on beads. Initiation, a bead was involved. A young man being initiated into a man, he wore beads. The female, to become a young female, she wore a particular bead. The female had about 8 or 9 different types of beads because they were special. She wore beads that tell her if she was looking for a man, if she was divorced, single, or not looking for a man.
You know, this would have been really useful if there were a lot more women when I was dating that had beads like this. Well, Dabls, founder of the MBAD African Bead Museum, thank you so much for stopping by.
You're welcome.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, this was fascinating.
Yes, thank you.
Go check out the museum, and until next time, Detroit's moving.
Keep up.
The D Brief.
Your guide to Detroit's arts and entertainment scene.